Welcome to the Sociable Dog Pod, the podcast for anyone who wants to know more about the extraordinary relationship we have with our dogs and why we don't always understand each other. We'll be digging into the roots of dog behaviour so we can get to know our best friends better and make our lives with them a little richer. We'll be busting some of those sticky myths about why they do what they do, exploring how they learn, and trying to interpret their language. We'll talk science, we'll share stories, have some laughs, and make some interesting discoveries all along the way. I'm Si Wooler, and I've been working with dogs and their humans for more than 15 years. So let's talk dogs. This week we're going to be discussing fear of people, or, as we call it in the biz, stranger danger. It can seem pretty inexplicable that dogs that are perfectly sweet and friendly with their own family can bark, growl, or even attack people who are complete strangers and who have done absolutely nothing to hurt them. In some cases, it's not even all strangers. Their likes and dislikes can be bizarrely specific, leaving you baffled about why they don't like one person while another person who, to all intents and purposes, seems the same, is fine.
So what is that all about? Why some people are not others? Is there something specific about them?
Well, somewhat inconveniently, some dogs may dislike men more than they dislike women, or they may dislike women more. That's less common, by the way. You're going to say there's no surprise there, aren't you?
I could not possibly comment. This is an equal opportunities pod.
Right, back to motivators. It could be that your dog is okay with men in hats, but not okay with men who have beards. Walking sticks might be okay hanging in the hall, but not being carried. Men might be fine, but not walking with a stick, while women are okay either way. Typical. You get the idea. Context matters. Now, it may be stating the obvious, but fear of people is essentially the same as any other fear condition. The only difference between fear of dogs or fear of people, fear of vehicles, or even black plastic bags blowing in the wind is the stimulus or the trigger. Right? The pathology behind them all is the same. Identifying the specific trigger that causes our dogs to be upset isn't always straightforward, but once we have them, we're well on the way towards usefully helping these poor kids. Now, since I'm talking about helping them, let's be clear about what's happening here. They aren't choosing to be frightened of harmless things. They just are frightened of them. It's an involuntary response. They don't know that that person is entirely harmless. To them, they might as well be a lion or a hungry tiger who fancies them for tea. And that fear response has deep, deep roots in evolution. Evolutionarily speaking, if as a dog you decide to run away from something that might be dangerous, and you're wrong, you might miss out on a bit of fodder or a chance to mate with some hot poodle, but you're alive, and it is not the end of the world. It is the end of the world if you're frightened of everything, and so consequently you never eat and eventually die of starvation. But, on the other hand, if you decide that the lion isn't dangerous and carry on chomping on some fine cuisine and the lion eats you, then you absolutely don't get to make that mistake twice now, do you? And you never get the chance to pass on your devil-may-care genes to the next generation. So it's not entirely unreasonable that the default mechanism for dealing with the unknown is to assume that it's a problem and either get it to go away or get out of Dodge as quickly as possible.
I get the evolutionary thing totally, that as a species over millennia, dogs have adapted to be very cautious about strange things so that they can stay safe. But surely here in the big modern world these days, a dog should, over time, recognise that men in hats or whatever are no big threat and just gradually get over it.
Yeah, I can see why you might think that. But the explanation of why that doesn't happen is thresholds. Animals have a fear threshold, which is the point at which they move from an exposure to a stimulus that they are comfortable with and one which they aren't. It's why you often hear trainers like me banging on about keeping fearful dogs under threshold as much as possible. If a dog is well padded to new things, that is, they take them in their stride because of all kinds of things like genetics and early socialization and so on, their threshold will be high. But fearful dogs have low thresholds in certain contexts. When they're over threshold, then much of their nervous system functions go to self-preservation and survival, and fewer go to learning. Adrenaline is produced and directed to the muscles, etc., readying the dog for flight, fight, or freeze.
So basically what you're saying is that dogs who are innately fearful of something have less ability to learn that they're going to be okay because there's all this chemical stuff pumping around their body.
Yes, in essence, the biggest priority is survival. And so exploring and discovering whether something's essentially safe is not high on the priority list, right? Because you've got things like cortisol as well that's manufactured to deal with stress, right? And all of these chemicals are pushing through their bodies, and it takes time for them to start to find their equilibrium again. It's all about getting them out of trouble. Any learning takes place subsequently, but not in the way you might think. They learn that the danger was deterred. In the case of flight, they learn that running away got them out of trouble, and so they run away the next time because they perceive it to have been successful. In the case of freeze, they perceive it to have been successful because the threat doesn't see them, and in the case of fight, they learn that aggressive responses make the scary thing go away. Now, if, for example, they choose to freeze, but the threat keeps moving towards them, their reaction is more likely to be escalation to flight or fight than it is to, hello, mate, so you're friendly, are you?
So there's all sorts of unhelpful learning then going on. So what do we do?
Well, we could just leave them to get on with it and make sure they don't have to encounter scary things any more than they need to. Now, there is a case for that. It's called choosing a management policy. You manage their lives and yours in such a way that you minimise the risk of difficult encounters, and so you keep them feeling happier and potentially make the world safer for everyone involved. Your dog doesn't have the Scooby-Doo scared out of him, and innocent passers-by don't run the risk of big dogs with sharp teeth snarking, barking, or even biting them. So management is one way, perfectly legitimate option.
Legitimate, maybe, but it sounds really tricky. I mean, you can't be absolutely sure you're never going to encounter something that kicks your dog off if you're out. Let's say your dog is scared of men in hats. What if someone moves in next door who never goes anywhere without a baseball cap? You can't exactly say, hi, welcome to the neighbourhood, love the fashion statement, but can you just nix the hat? My dog doesn't like it.
No, for a lot of people, this is difficult or near impossible to implement, and there is always the risk of errors in management that could be costly. Equally, too, this wasn't the dream, was it? The idea was to have another family member who could go out walking with you, welcome guests to the house with a waggy tail, and play with the neighbourhood dogs in the park. It's not just you who are missing out either. Your dog is missing out on all the pleasures that a more sociable life has to offer. There's likely to always be a need for some management, at least initially, but behaviour modification could also unlock new pleasures and more relaxed and happy lives all round. Knowing whether you're going to opt for simply management, behaviour modification, or how much of a mix of the two is going to be only something you can decide. And obviously, an experienced trainer can help with that. Not forgetting too that the answer may involve your vet. They may need to rule out any medical conditions that could account for the behaviour, particularly if it's a sudden change in behaviour. And they might be very much a part in deciding whether meds are going to help in making behaviour modification easier or not. Takes a village. And just as an aside, there may be a pain issue around long-term behaviour problems too, because if they're suffering from chronic pain, that pain may be long-term in itself. Okay, one thing should be abundantly clear by now. Any behaviour exhibited as a result of fear isn't a choice. In the first instance, it's spontaneous, and as it proves effective at keeping scary stuff away, it becomes learned and so is maintained. There's no fault or blame to be allotted here. It isn't your dog's fault, they can't help it. It isn't your fault, you only want the best for your dog. It isn't the stranger's fault, they were just going to the shop down the road or popping round to return the book they borrowed from you. No foul.
Is it generally the case that they've been mistreated by the sort of strangers that they don't like earlier in their lives?
Sure, it's possible, yeah, but it's equally possible that they haven't been. Whether we have history like that or not actually doesn't make much difference. There are particular techniques to use for helping dogs who are fearful. We may not know why they are fearful, but fortunately, we don't necessarily need to know. The answer to the why question here doesn't change what we're going to do. That's fortunate because we often don't know why. We can speculate, but we don't know for sure. And in any case, the speculation or the knowledge of what caused the fear doesn't change what we do. We usually have a good idea of the context for the behaviour, which gives us the starting point for what to do. One thing that is never the right starting point is punishment or any kind of aversive techniques to deal with it. Now, if you've told your dog off for snarling at the neighbour or the neighbour's dog, then forgive yourselves. I get it. I really do. It's alarming, embarrassing and scary to witness or experience your dog behaving aggressively. But therein lies the rub. We as humans respond in the same way to scary stuff as our dogs do. Our options are fight, flight or freeze, just as theirs are. So it's not all that surprising that we act or react aggressively when we're faced with their behaviour. But we have the ability to rationalise it, recognise that it's unhelpful and opt for an alternative once we understand what is really going on. I hope this podcast is giving people some insights that fear is not bad behaviour. It's not a choice.
Okay, so we might know what sort of strangers trigger the dog to behave defensively or aggressively, even if we don't understand at all why those strangers get that reaction. So how do we resolve it?
Fair question. And for many people, it'll be the only thing that matters. There are probably plenty of people currently shouting, never mind the what about the how? Okay, first, broken record time. Get help from a reputable, credentialed, force-free trainer to help you. Provided you get good quality help, you won't regret it. Secondly, start thinking in terms of building positive associations between the people who scare your dog and something they like a lot. That might be sausage or cheese or even a game of ball. On the subject of ballies, you tell the story of how you and Thompson, my first Rottie, got acquainted, don't you? Why don't you tell everyone what happened there?
Yeah, for Thompson, a game of ball could definitely turn a stranger into a friend, but it took time and an awful lot of care. When you got Thompson, he was people and dog aggressive to a big degree. And I think in his case, he had been abused earlier in life. I think you found, didn't you? When you got him, he was very much a sort of last chance rescue. When I came along, he was much more of an elder statesman, and you'd made a fair bit of progress with him. But he was still, for someone like me, whose sole dog experience at that point was a Cocker Spaniel who loved the entire world and everything in it, he was a challenging prospect, shall we say. But in fairness, this was entirely mutual, because I was a challenging prospect for him as well. And that may seem strange. I mean, a lot of people, I think, find it inexplicable that dogs can be fearful and aggressive towards perfectly unthreatening people. I mean, I'm all of 5'4". I'm not exactly a woman mountain. I'm not very loud. And he was huge. But the thing was, I was a stranger. And as far as he was concerned, that was really threatening and scary. So when it came to first meetings and first introductions, you gave me some really clear instructions. Don't talk to him. Don't look at him directly. Don't try to pet him. And I was, yeah, right. No chance I'm going to pet him. Absolutely not. To start with, we had these kind of tiny little micro meetings, where I just sort of popped in and popped out again. Not much more than giving him a little bit of a wee sense of Odinina. Then I'd come and have a cup of coffee, and I'd be sitting on the sofa, and he'd sit in his armchair with a muzzle on because you didn't want to take any risks. And he just watched my every move. And I have to say, and I know that if he's looking down from a cloud somewhere, he's going to forgive me, that there was a distinct Hannibal Lecter vibe about him when he was watching me. But I tried to stay cool and didn't try to think much about what he might be considering around fava beans and Chianti mixes. But we stuck with the programme, and I kept visiting, and we went out for walks, you, me, him and the world-loving spaniel. And one day when we were out on the walks, he just brushed up against my leg and I sort of hopped back and thought, oh, I must have bumped into him. And then it happened again and again. And then I realised that actually it wasn't an accident. It was a bit of an overture, a little shy hello. After that, we became much more confident and the muzzle came off. And that's when things really started to fly, because he realised that I was not some very scary bird that he didn't know. I was the best ball launcher he had ever had the good fortune to encounter. And he loved playing ball. It was his absolute favourite thing. And if anyone is thinking that this was just the occasional game of ball in the garden, oh my dear, no. It was anytime, anywhere, inside or out. Now, to start with, he'd just catch the ball and he had this funny little trick that he'd catch it and roll it around his muzzle and then he'd sort of head it back to me so he didn't have to get tremendously close. But then he got bolder and he'd come and put it on the corner of the sofa where I was sitting. And after that, we were just mates. And he'd greet me and Woody when I turned up at the door, still going like crazy. And he'd chase Woody around the house, covering him sloppery, slurpy kisses.
That's really illustrative of how this all works. So once Thompson was hopelessly in love with you, he soon learned that Woody, your adorable Cocker Spaniel, was the predictor of you showing up. And so by virtue of association, he came to love Woody. The kissing was a bit over the top as far as Woody was concerned, but as I kept telling him, it was preferable to the alternative. It's important to remember when you're trying to change emotional responses in this way that there is only one contingency in play. The payoff, usually a tasty treat, or in Thompson's case, a potential game of bally, is contingent on or conditional on the scary person being there. That's it, right? Nothing else. They don't have to do anything. If the scary person is there, they get paid. If they go off like a banshee, you get them back under threshold and you pay them regardless.
But if they're getting paid with something they like, even though they are, in inverted commas, air quotes, I'm doing it on a podcast again, even though they're behaving in a way you don't want them to, that feels like you're reinforcing bad behaviour.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because the short answer to it is no. I know, but hear me out. Hopefully it will become clearer. While you can use obedience behaviours to get a positive emotional response to a stimulus, the real purpose of it is to make associations and so get a change of emotion or attitude. In order for that to be effective, the ratio of scary person to yummy stuff needs to be as close to 1-to-1 as possible. The motivation for the behaviour isn't to access the food, you see. It's to deal with the scary person, to make them go away. As the scary person becomes less scary, you see less of the problem behaviour, not more. If every time the person appeared, your dog kicked off in order to access the food, the opposite would be true. But it isn't. As the fear subsides, the behaviour goes away. If you've incorrectly diagnosed the problem and your dog isn't upset but excited and you pay him each time he sees a stranger, then you are likely to get more of the excitable behaviour. But that's a different podcast. There are a couple of ways that I start working stranger danger cases. One where I'm the first stranger and I appear and disappear at gradually decreasing distance while the dog's familiar human dishes out the good stuff. As long as the dog looks expectant of the prize, I keep moving closer each time the dog sees me. The other way is to allow the dog opportunity to approach, and I throw food at whatever distance they choose to stay away from me. They generally collect a few morsels before moving a little bit closer as they become more relaxed at the presence of this, novel food dispenser until they're feeding from my hand. I have to inject some reality here. This could take one session or it could take several, but you'll recognise that this is a very similar thing to the situation you were describing with Thompson, right? As he got more confident about the fact that this reliable ball dispenser was going to operate, he would bring the ball closer. I also want to stress that I don't try to coax the dog to approach and feed closer or from my hand before they're ready. Why? Well, pressure. This is what it looks like. You hold out your hand with food on it and start your persuasion. Come on then, here's some yummy chicken. Don't you want it? You do really, don't you? Right? The dog has only previously come to, say, 12 feet away, is now conflicted. He's scared, but he also wants the chicken. He creeps steadily forward until eventually he stretches forward, grabs the food and quickly retreats, not to be seen again for 20 minutes or potentially the end of the session. That's a setback. If, on the other hand, I throw the food to where he chooses to stop, and I'm reliable in that, he starts to voluntarily move forward a little after a number of throws. Now, there are no conditions, and so his confidence and comfort levels grow more quickly. He sticks around waiting for the next throw until he is ready to move forward. There may be the odd retreat, but they're a lot less frequent and much shorter lived. When your first stranger is familiar, you move on to the next stranger and see if they become familiar faster than the first, the third faster than the first and second, and so on. Social butterfly by the end? Maybe.
In really severe cases of stranger aggression, you sometimes have to warm the space even before you meet the dog, don't you? So that they associate just your smell with good stuff. It all sounds a bit weird, but you explain why you might hand over a sweaty T-shirt in a sealed bag. Such a classy way to introduce yourself to a new client.
Yes. In extreme cases, when you can't even get close enough to the dog for him to see you without going off, then more radical measures are needed. The method you're referring to is to get the dog familiar with your smell, their first stranger, without you needing to be present. You send the client a worn T-shirt in a Ziploc bag and ask them to put other items in other Ziploc bags. Over a period of a week or two, they open random bags and let their dog sniff what's inside. If the bag contains the shirt you've worn, then a party is thrown. If the bag contains anything else, then nothing happens. That way, the dog establishes a positive, conditioned, emotional response to your smell because it's come to predict the party. Then you can move on to the dog seeing you as well as smelling your scent. It's weird, yeah, but it works. So call me weird. I don't care.
Wouldn't dream of calling you weird, in public at least. So, what are we going to do next week?
Well, I thought what we'd do next week is look at a common problem sometimes that isn't recognised, and that is resource guarding. So that's guarding of people, food, places, objects, most commonly. See you then.